There are several old adages in both life and business. Many of them we've heard. One is seeing is believing. And I think you may have also heard the other side, that if you believe it, then you will see it. So that's one. Another common one is what gets measured gets done. And I might joke that, well, let's just get it done so that it can be measured. That'd be the flip side of that. Then there's also this one about, maybe not spoken about quite as much, change management. Change can be planned, change can be seen, change is something that you manage. Well, maybe it's actually the other side of that as well. Maybe change is invisible and more emergent. So what I'd like to do for 14 minutes here is talk about an international rotation that I personally just came back from, living in London for 3 years, and try and take adages like that and maybe prove that both sides can be true at the same time, and ideally relate it right to learning organizations and the chief learning officer role. So take you back to March of 2014. That's when my company, the company I work for, bought me a one-way ticket to London, which is an interesting ticket to buy. So I jumped on a plane. I had been around Europe, but I had never been to London yet. So when I landed to live there, it was actually my first time being there. And of course, right when you land, as we talked about this morning, if you heard it, the physical differences were the first thing I noticed. So of course, sitting in the other side of the car to drive the car, driving on the other side of the road, light switches were noticeable to me as opposed to a flip switch. You press buttons up and down, which if you travel between continents, you can actually jam your finger if you don't pay attention to which one you're in. And then, not to be crass, but toilets. It's not a lever, it's buttons, and buttons are very important to know which one. So those were big differences I noticed. I also thought it started as a 6-month secondment. It started as a rotation for 6 months. The plan with the family, with my family, was I would go for a month or two first. My wife and daughters would stay back for school in the States, wait till the summer break, then they'd come for the entire summer. I would stay another month or so and then come back. So we had it timed as best we could to be together as much as we could with a summer. Well, it turned out that only about 2 months, so about a third of the way through that 6-month rotation, they offered me a 3-year contract. They said, would you like to be head of organization development? And while you're here, we'll send you over into the Oxford area if you're interested. There's an organization called National Training Labs, NTL. They offer a certification in OD. So I tried not to read it into much that of I was on a development rotation and then getting more development on my development. I hope there wasn't a deeper message, but I think I read something into that. So I did. I went over to the National Training Labs, earned that certificate. It's a 11 to 12-month program, 6 one-week in residencies. The very first of the 6 is called TGroup. If you're not familiar with TGroup, it stands for Training Group. It's from around the 1950s and 1960s. It used to be called, well, TGroup always, but also Human Sensitivity Training. And what you do in that human sensitivity training is you sit in a circle of 7 to 12-ish strangers with a professionally skilled facilitator, and for 5 days straight, you learn about yourself. Without PowerPoint, without slides, without conversation, other than what's going on for you in that moment, the impact it has on yourself, and the impact it has on others. If I can be overly candid, I got so much out of that, I went back for a second. And between the two of them, to this day, I am still healing from those experiences. They are quite deep. So I was able to apply that directly back to the business, which I think is something we often talk about in this role. So I came back to the office after the first TGroup, and there was a group, I'll protect the innocent here. There were 2 groups that were working together on a large multi-million-dollar, multi-million-pound program, and they weren't necessarily getting along very well. So they brought in the organization development group and said, can you help us work together better? We did the standard approach. We gathered data, we interviewed everyone, we interviewed all the stakeholders. We put together a little bit of a half-day workshop to have some deep open conversation. We walked into the room that day quite prepared. The conversation started, and as you might predict, it was relatively superficial or shallow, if I can use a judgment like that. After a few hours of that kind of conversation, you could start to sense that people were really ready to talk about what's going on between these two groups. So what I had learned sitting in TGroup was it's about noticing how much data your body, your physical body gives you about your emotion, of course your thoughts, but there's even just bodily sensations that are full of data. You're aware of these, but you may or may not comment on them publicly. So as I'm facilitating these two groups not getting along, there's a gentleman sitting right to my left. In an effort to try and look comfortable, he took his left foot and put it up over top of his right knee, sitting right next to me. His left foot started shaking violently. Well, having been in TGroup, I knew that was a red flag. There was something going on in that moment for him. So I simply leaned forward into the group and said, "I notice your foot is shaking," and leaned back out. No judgment, no interpretation, just pure curiosity. That proved to be the front door for him to then let it all out. Everything had come from years of frustration and irritation. He put it all on the table, and that turned to be the pivot point for that group, both of those teams, to build new trust and to work together, and that came directly from that TGroup experience. Unfortunately, 2 years into the 3-year contract, the extension I had on the contract, we had a cost challenge in HR. So we had to relook at all of the centers of expertise in the entire shared services model, and long story short there, we ended up removing the organization development function in the UK. So it then became time for me to repatriate back to the States, which was frankly sad on many levels for many people involved. So I've been back about 2 months now, 2.5 months maybe, so I'm just now reacquainting myself with the States here, and noticing how different it feels, how things, I can see them and notice and observe much differently now than before having gone over there. So I could talk more and more about the differences, the cultural differences between the US and the UK and give more specific examples, but actually to me, the learning was something much broader than that. There was something about studying group dynamics, living in different group dynamic settings so that I can now be more aware of how different groups behave. And then even to this point of living in the moment. I think before going over there, I found myself more anxious and more living in the future. Now having experienced different cultures, there's more now coming to this exact moment. So for example, right now, I'm quite here on stage, and that feels different compared to Power Hour Mike several years ago when we did this. It's a different emotion. There's a more connectedness. So that's what I'm beginning to offer to this CLO role, is there's something about finding that deep, authentic self of you, creating a space, and then contributing from that space where you are that deep, authentic version of yourself. But why would we do all of this? Why would I go on international rotation? What's the business value of sending people around the world when there's quite a reputation that people either leave the company or don't come back? There's something about international rotations are expensive and may or may not be worth it. So the list I have is more international business. Most businesses are now talking about being in international markets, looking for international growth. So experiencing those cultures is right up there from the business perspective. In this room, development, retention of employees, and an overall engagement is right up there for business case of doing this kind of rotation. And then almost the talent management aspect of it, getting the right people in the right time at the right place for the right cost, which then reminds me of the knowledge management collaboration side of it, which is more about connecting those who know with those who need to know, that flow of knowledge. Experiencing those different cultures really offers something there. Ernst & Young actually does research on global mobility effectiveness. So I looked up some statistics from their past 4 or 5 annual reports. What they say is that 58% of the over 200 organizations they surveyed have a global mobility agenda. So it's more than half of companies actually have a plan for more or some level of effort around global mobility. It's actually 72% of those organizations don't measure the return on investment. They just run it out there and see if it works or not. So very few are actually measuring it. 30% have a tool that tracks where their business travelers are. So I have to wonder if companies even know where their people are if there's only 30% that's just not tracked through a tool. And then the very last one, this speaks directly to the reputation. Only 16% of people that go on international rotations leave within 2 years of coming back. So it's trying to say most people, by their measurement, actually stay when they come back to the company. And my experience, I feel very connected. I would very much like to stay. It feels like there's a deeper bond with the organization from such an amazing learning opportunity. So then to this point of bringing it in the room, and since it's towards the end of the day, I thought we could do an exercise together. We still have a couple of minutes here. Can I get everybody just to stand up for a second? And let's try this. While you're standing, I want you to carefully, if you can, just close your eyes. With your eyes closed, try and notice your breath. Take a moment, create that space. While you're noticing your breath, see if you have any emotions or bodily sensations. Is there anything twitching? Is there tension? Is there pressure? What's going on for you with all that data that your body is giving you? Okay, now while you're standing, open your eyes back up and look around the room. Without judging, just from a pure curiosity point of view, notice what it looks like around the room. Are there people happy, sad, laughing? What was going on for you in that moment? That's the point I think I'm trying to make most of all is, can you find that space where you're in your full body and you are then offering that to the group and the dynamic that's happening right there around you. So you can sit back down now. Hopefully that got a little energy. As we close, what I'd like to close with is people are very different, like the adage at the beginning. People are very different, and yet people are quite similar the world over. The meaningful work is probably in bridging that gap between the difference and then what's the same. And then a quote that I learned while I was over there, real change begins when you become who you are as opposed to who you want to be. That's a tricky one, so maybe repeat it. Real change begins when you become who you are as opposed to who you want to be. The perspective I may be offering for you right now is that I think that's useful not only from an individual point of view, but also from an organizational learning point of view. Dickies and Sean just mentioned it's about becoming who you are, and maybe it's actually finding that and operating from that holistic, authentic self that is the most impactful work we can do. Thank you.